I want you to hit me as hard as you can.
You're not with military, you're not mercenary. What are you? Lost tourist?
I'm no tourist.
In the year 1987, Sylvester Stallone's arm wrestling canon camp classic Over the Top was a box office bomb. This was a shock, as Sylvester Stallone had had the number 2 and 3 highest grossing movies of the year in 1985, and it had Cobra in 1986, which was a blockbuster.
You know what the trouble with you is? You're too violent.
His box office power seemed impossible to challenge. I mean, the man survived Rhinestone.
Budweiser, you created a monster.
Alas, a flop is a flop, so for his follow-up, Stallone returned to one of his most popular characters ever, John Rambo.
I don't believe this.
Rambo III is often looked down at as the silliest film in the franchise, boasting a story that perhaps hasn't aged very well, with Rambo making his way to Afghanistan to help the Afghan Rebels fight the Russians. Post 9/11, the movie was suddenly a lot more controversial than it had ever been intended to be. But the same could be said about a lot of other 80s action movies, with the James Bond outing, The Living Daylights, having a very similar plot.
I need to use your phone. Should call you back.
Who are you?
Bond, James Bond.
It's worth noting, though, that by the time Rambo 3 actually hit theaters, the Russians had withdrawn from Afghanistan, so that war was kind of over. Indeed, the road to Rambo 3 was a tough one. Originally, Highlander's Russell Mulcahy was set to direct, but he was fired after 2 weeks of filming in Israel, when apparently, or according to Stallone at least, his choices for vicious-looking Russian troops seemed, in Stallone's words, to be 24 blonde, blue-eyed pretty boys that resembled rejects from a surfing contest. Not exactly the kind of guys to make your blood run cold. The film would also go through 3 cinematographers. Instead, Peter MacDonald, who was the second unit director of Rambo First Blood Part 2, was hired to direct, which meant that the movie's action, of course, would be impeccable, as this was one area MacDonald excelled, with him shooting the iconic opening stick fighting sequence with a handheld rig. The movie would end up being shot in Israel, Arizona, and Thailand.
Where are you from?
Arizona?
Arizona? How much days walk?
Oh, about 2 years.
Thank you so much for watching Sylvester Stallone Revisited. If you like this type of content, make sure to click on the like button as well as the bell to receive notifications for all of our latest videos. Now back to the show. Now the problem with Rambo 3 compared to the rest of the series is this. It was somewhat dated before it hit theaters, and that definitely affected the reception for the movie. The late 80s, of course, were a period of glasnost, with the Cold War coming to an end and audiences suddenly seeming tired of a war which was simmering down.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
They didn't want to see the Cold War play out on the big screen. They were sick of it, and it seemed to be over at the time. With the risk of being political, how little we knew. If anything, though, in my opinion anyway, Rambo 3 would emerge to be a surprisingly potent depiction of the war in Afghanistan, including the US's relationship with the Mujahideen and more.
What we must do is to stop this killing of our women and children. If getting this man free, so he can return to the free world and tell what happens here is necessary, then of course we will help.
When it came out in 1988, it was derided as ultra-violent right-wing pulp, which I guess in kinda some ways it may be, but I think there's more to this movie than meets the eye. For me though, Rambo 3 is first and foremost about Rambo coming full circle as a character. The series really could have ended here, and actually did for about 20 years. When we first meet John Rambo in First Blood, he's a broken man. He's a shell-shocked mess, and that ending when he's taken to jail is a tragedy. Rambo First Blood Part 2 turns Rambo into a hero and gives him a redemptive arc, but it still ends with him basically being a man without a country.
I want what they want. And every other guy who came over here and spilt his guts and gave everything he had once for our country to love us as much as we love it.
When Rambo 3 starts, he's found some measure of peace working at a local monastery in Thailand, while still satisfying his more primal side with a series of brutal stick-fighting battles, which to me stands as the movie's highlight. Of course, Richard Crenna's Trotman, who's the Dr. Frankenstein to his creature, can never leave him alone and tries to bring Rambo in to help him fight the war in Afghanistan, with Rambo memorably telling him that
My war's over.
Before leaving, in an often mocked but kind of brilliant scene, Trotman compares him to a sculpture, saying,
"We didn't make you this fighting machine. We just chipped away the rough edges."
Trotman, of course, is doomed without Rambo, leading to his pal going back on his desire to remain in the monastery and going to war once again.
Can you get me in?
You're not serious.
Oh yeah, I'm serious.
Up until the 4th installment, Rambo, this was considered the most violent entry of the series, with it briefly holding a Guinness World Record for the most violent acts in a film. I think that record was actually broken probably by the next Rambo movie, which makes this look like almost G-rated in comparison. It all ends on kind of a hopeful note, with Rambo going off with Trotman and seemingly having found some measure of peace. I always thought after watching this movie that Rambo was going to return to the US, but alas, by watching Rambo, which was the 4th film in the series, we know that's not what happened. Apparently, in an alternate ending, Rambo actually decided to stay with the Afghan freedom fighters, having finally found the cause to fight for what he always wanted. But alas, I guess that was viewed as too political and it didn't make its way into the movie. Now, as pure action, Rambo 3 is pretty tough to beat. It was the most expensive film of all time when it was made, costing anywhere from 58 to 63 million, depending on who you believe. It was one of the first big movies Carolco made independently, which was Andrew G. Vajna's company, with Mario Kassar. These guys were behind some of the best action movies of the late 80s and early 90s. I mean, the list of movies these guys made is just endless. There's Extreme Prejudice from Walter Hill, there's Red Heat, also from Walter Hill, there's Total Recall, there's Terminator 2 Judgment Day, a movie some of you may have heard of.
Chill out, dickwad.
Basic Instinct, of course, and Stallone's own Cliffhanger. Sadly, the studio did have a few huge flops like Mountains of the Moon and the infamous Cutthroat Island, which I've always thought was underrated.
Bad dog.
That ended their reign as the greatest action studio out there. Rambo 3, though, was their arrival into the majors. Stallone is perhaps at his physical peak in this movie, with him pumped up beyond belief. I mean, the guy is chiseled. However, I still think it comes up short next to Rambo First Blood Part 2 because it feels unfocused and perhaps too reliant on second unit action. The villain, Mark DeJong's Alexei, is bland next to Steven Berkoff in Rambo 2, and don't even get me started on how much better Brian Dennehy is in First Blood. I mean, they needed a memorable villain with some pathos, and they don't have that here. He's just a boogeyman. The film does, however, benefit from a top-shelf score by Jerry Goldsmith, even if much of it was excised for some reason, with the producers favoring cues reused from the previous films. Not sure why they did that, because if you listen to the extended score album, it's really, really good, and they cut some of the best music out of the movie. Very strange, although I guess Goldsmith didn't hold much of a grudge because he would become kind of Carolco's house composer for a while. He even composed the theme music for the studio logo, which I loved. They also included a couple of Giorgio Moroder songs on the soundtrack, which is a strange addition, only one of which actually made its way into the movie, a cover of He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother by Bill Medley. Now this of course was the year after Time of My Life, so I imagine they thought they had a huge hit on their hands. They didn't, but you know, the song ain't bad. The best thing about Rambo 3 for me is that Rambo actually shows his more humane side in this film by having him befriend a local boy named Hamid, who at one point was actually going to return as Rambo's adopted son in another sequel. Richard Crenna also got his biggest part in the series, with him elevated to co-star status, as the whole plot really does center around Trotman's kidnapping. When Rambo 3 came out in May of 1988, it had a pretty major effect on the pop culture. Rambo's "Your Worst Nightmare" catchphrase became popular in its misquoted "I'm your worst nightmare" form.
Who are you?
Your worst nightmare.
The movie would be memorably parodied by Weird Al in UHF. And then by Hot Shots Part 2, which even managed to enlist Richard Crenna as the movie's Trotman figure.
I see you're no stranger to pain.
I've been married. Twice.
It must have been surreal sending up the film that, you were in just a couple of years earlier. There's also a dig at Rambo 3 in Twins where Arnold Schwarzenegger compares his muscles to Stallone's by looking at the poster and then laughs. At the time, these guys were kind of frenemies. Now they're just friends. Isn't that nice?
What are you doing? Praying for work? Could be. Have you been sick? You lost weight?
Really? Now, whatever weight I lost, you found, pal.
Oddly, though, Rambo 3 was actually not a box office hit. It underperformed domestically by a pretty wide margin, grossing only $53 million, which was just over a third of what the previous Rambo film had made. Internationally, it was a bigger hit, and it topped out at $189 million worldwide, meaning everybody involved made some money. But it was nowhere near the size of what anyone was expecting. I mean, the last Rambo movie had made $300 million worldwide, and this made, just over half. Notably, it was outgrossed domestically by a pretty wide margin by the film it opened against on Memorial Day weekend in 1988. Paul Hogan's Crocodile Dundee, Part 2, in the duel of the 80s icons. I think Crocodile Dundee won this round.
Thank you. Certainly fine. You know who that was? Clint Eastwood.
For Sly, it would be a harbinger of a cool period in his career, with the next year's Tango and Cash his sole hit for a 4-year spell that would end with his major return to glory with 1993's Cliffhanger. While movies like Lock Up, Rocky V, Oscar, and the infamous Stop or My Mom Will Shoot all at least underperformed at the box office and were more disastrous than not. Alas, there'll be more on those as well as Sly's perhaps ill-advised foray into comedy to come. As it stands, though, Rambo 3 is not the best of the Rambo series, but it's definitely not the worst either. In its own way, it's something of an 80s classic, and I give it a 7 on 10. I like this movie. It's a nostalgic favorite of mine.
May God deliver us from the venom of the Cobra, teeth of the tiger, and the vengeance of the Afghan. You understand what this means?
That you guys don't take any shit?
Yes.